Wait, we're behind the blue curtain. Check. Make sure we're live on. Well, we are.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I just wasn't seeing something. I just wanted to make sure I was coming through. Oh, excuse me.
Bless you. And with that, we're going to go live. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Before we do that, buddy, I want to tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast.
On this podcast, we have podcast episodes that are centered around upcoming D&D games, I guess. And also we lose all of our time and we just post at random times and we go at random times. Listen. the Monday night podcast is a little bit dead and I'm sorry about that.
Well, hey, it's for a good reason. You're running a game currently and we'll be running a game shortly. Which is kind of why this is happening. It seems to be that we're going to be running in PF2E with very little fanfare and a tight vote margin, but with like a 10% response rate. So
yeah, quite a shrug.
Yeah.
Am I peaking? I feel like I'm looking at my waveform and I feel like I'm seeing myself peaking. Am I okay?
You're fine on my end, but that's because I've always have you down a little bit. You always kind of peak a little bit. So
okay, well, fair enough. Yeah. So the idea is for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is the system that we're looking to run, and if we are going to be running this system, there's a lot of questions that I have that are going to need to be answered. And hey, listen, there might be some questions that you guys have that need to be answered, and if that's the case, now's the time to get it out, to get it known.
Yeah, so just as by way of very brief introduction, way back in the before times, there was once an edition of Dungeons and Dragons called 3.5, which everybody loved and everybody said this was good. And then Wizards of the Coast made 4th edition, which was divisive to say the least. And the good people at Paizo, who had been making third-party content for D&D, were like, we can just do like more 3.5 because Wizards of the Coast has generously put out 3.5 under this open games license, so anybody can do with it what they want. And so they went and made Pathfinder 1st edition. Well, it was called Pathfinder at the time. Sometimes referred to as 3.P. Which is essentially an advancement and a simplification of the 3.5 rules in some aspects, an expansion in others. It goes on for like 10 years. It's a very crunchy system. Eventually gets like very bloated. We've both played a ton of Pathfinder. In fact, early episodes of this podcast, we did like, I think class reviews on like, I think the last class came out for Pathfinder, last core class was the Shifter.
I really wanted to play a Shifter.
But then as all things do, Paizo's like, let's make another thing, right? We can sell people some more books. So they make, Pathfinder 2nd edition, which to my mind is about halfway between Pathfinder 1 and D&D 5, right? It did some of the simplification, did some streamlining. It also did some stuff in its own way, but is a crunchier game than D&D 5e without being quite as absurd as PF 1e. On top of this, at some point, Wizards of the Coast is like, JK, the open games license is bad because we can't monetize all of these streams that people are doing of D&D, and so we're going to try and capture some of that value. Everybody loses their minds, and Paizo's like, well, this means that we need to, the most generous take would be we need to change everything so that we're not legally liable. The most cynical take is like, we can sell everybody the same books again. And so they release a remastered version of Pathfinder 2nd edition, which is mostly the same, but strips out some of the D&Dism, sometimes to a level that I think is overdoing it. Like attacks of opportunity are no longer called attacks of opportunity. They're called like reactive strikes, right? Like that's the name of it. Like there's a bunch of stuff that people will refer to by their D&D name, but in the book they're by a different name because Paizo went really overboard in renaming things. Like Magic Missile is now Force Barrage, I think. stuff like
Wow.
that. Yeah.
Okay. So question in the chat, what does crunchier game mean? So we like to think about games as having a crunchy side and games as having sort of a theater
Fluffy
kit.
side.
This is fluffy side. Yeah, fluffy and crunch, okay? Crunch is mechanics. Crunch is I want to put a bunch of numbers into the calculator and get big, big numbers and stack modifiers and just deal with the raw system so that we can maximize our enjoyment by exploiting the system to make our numbers real big. Fluffy is like narrative. It is having a fun story. It is, interacting with cute NPCs, it's flirting with the villainess, right? Like it's all of like those kinds of things. That's when we talk about games being crunchier, that it is more on that side of things.
Yeah, and just to, like, on a systems level, right? Like, you can have plenty of fluff in your D&D or your Pathfinder game. It's just that, like, in, say, we played a luchador game at Gen Con once, right? And there were you would describe something and you would roll a die, but that was kind of like the depth of the mechanics. And I would even say that the luchador is one of the crunchier indie games I've played at Gen Con, just because they can be really fluffy, which is kind of just like, describe your thing, roll a die maybe, right? Whereas Pathfinder has a lot of mechanics that you can go into and pick things and do things, as opposed to kind of like leaving it more up to interpretation. Part of this too is that, like, the reason I say PF2E is crunchier than D&D 5e is not just because there's more mechanized interactions in certain parts. It also just has a lot more things, right? Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast have many things that are not Dungeons and Dragons. They have Magic the Gathering. They have all of their normie board games, right? And so they don't put out books at the same rate that Paizo does. Paizo does 2 hardbacks a year, and there's more content in them. Sometimes, and eventually it gets to a point where maybe there's a little bit too much of this, right? Like, you overspecify the system, but we're not quite there yet with PF2E. I think we were definitely there with PF1E. But because Paizo, what Paizo does is Pathfinder, there is plenty of Pathfinder content. And some of the way that they've gotten away from overcrunching the system, I think, is stuff like there are tons of books about Galarian, which is their in-house world, which maybe has some mechanic stuff in it, but has a lot of like fluff and like, places to set encounters and that type of thing.
Okay, well, listen, let's start right at the like very beginning. I'm trying to think of like the core stuff that we really ought to like kind of hit on first. And I think the big one is sort of actions, right?
Yes.
So if I'm thinking about D&D, I'm thinking about, my bonus action. I'm thinking about movement as sort of an action. I'm thinking about like attack actions. Going back into 3.5, we have full attack actions. We have full actions. We have swift actions. We have free actions. We have move, standard, right? Like there's just a ton of these different sort of things. The pitch for Pathfinder 2e that I remember talking about was all of that is done away with. Actions are just actions. Everybody gets 3 actions a turn. This is how we adjudicate that, basically.
Yes, that is most of it, right? Like, so everybody gets 3 actions. Everybody also gets a single reaction, right? This can all be like modified, but base you get 3 actions, a reaction, and then there are things such as free actions which don't cost anything. The kind of standard way this looks is like a move which is called a stride is a single action. One would have been a 5-foot step, which is like a move that won't provoke, is an action. It's called a step. It's a single action. A strike, which is kind of your basic attack, is an action, and then things go from there. Most spells are 2 actions. Some of them are 3. Some of them are 1. A handful are, the more actions you spend, the more effect you get. Right. The classic example of this is heal. The basic heal spell. 1 action is a touch range spell that does level D8 worth of healing. A level being level of the spell slot you cast it out of. The 2 action version is a 30-foot range, and that's level D8 plus 8 static times spell level. And the 3 action version is level D8 in a 30-foot radius, 30-foot emanation being centered on the caster, which can heal your allies, harm undead, that kind of thing. So you can get you can choose which mode you want for that kind of thing. Reactions are mostly your standard stuff that you'd think of. So actually, this is something that's a little bit different. Raising a shield to get like the AC bonus is a single action, and then you can block with your shield as a reaction, and that reduces some damage. The shield takes some damage. Attacks of opportunity or reactive strikes are a reaction, although a big point is that not everything has attacks of opportunity. In fact, I think only the fighters get it at level 1, and most marshals get it at least as an option around level 5. But like a lot of things don't have attacks of opportunity, and you don't have to worry about that as much, which helps with kind of like the conga line of death thing you would see in like 3.5 and PF20. So those are kind of like, I know I went through a lot there from the top down, but does that all make sense?
Okay, that definitely does make sense to me. Especially the stuff with the shields is pretty neat. That's not stuff
Yeah.
I had really sort of heard before. Are there any other additional, just like quickly, mechanics around kind of like tanking or increasing your AC? Is that like a thing? Did they mechanize that at all in Pathfinder 2e?
So tanking. So there's a class in playtest that is called the Guardian that has some light tanking mechanics in terms of like threat generation. There are a couple of spells that can do it, but for the most part, there's no like most TTRPGs, there's not like a true like threat generation mechanics. But raising a shield can raise your AC. There are several weapons with the parry trait. Traits are a big thing in the system as well, which are kind of like little tags that like do predefined things. So you have to like
weapon masteries.
Yes, but weapon masteries are more, I think, akin to critical specializations, which we'll get to. I don't want to keep just like expanding. That's totally
yeah.
But there are some weapons with the parry trait, which is essentially you spend an action and you get a +1 bonus to AC, that kind of thing. I like there are various things like that. I think you can also like take cover behind a tower shield, which gives you cover, which is a separate mechanic. It's like a flat DC 5 flat checks being you just roll a D20 with no modifier. And so like, you know, that's like a 25% chance of missing someone in a normal cover, that kind of thing.
Okay. That's like an old 20% miss chance, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that side of things. So I remember the playtest, there was the idea that you would have success, critical failure, and failure, right? And the idea was you roll a die. If you beat the DC by 5, you get a critical success. If you fail the DC by 5 or more, you get a critical failure. If you get in between those, you get just a normal success, normal sort of failure. Is that still accurate, or?
It's 10.
10. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So that it actually makes things. I really like it because it lets your classic problem with a save or suck spell is that if you fail, it's terrible, and if you succeed, for the caster, it's terrible, right? They basically get nothing out of it, right? The way most save or suck spells work now is critical success means if you get a critical success against a save or suck spell, you have no effect. If you get a success, you get some minor hindrance against you, so it's not a totally wasted spell. If you get a failure, you get like a moderate malice. In some cases, this will look like the traditional version of the spell. In some cases, it'll look like a weaker version, like blindness, right? I think if I don't remember quite off the top of my head, but I believe success is like dazzled for a round, failure is like blindness for either a round or a minute, and critical failure is your kind of like blind until you solve, until you get cured of it, right? Like blind forever theoretically, right? That kind of thing. And so this lets you do these this kind of staggered thing. It also makes it so that like fighters crit fairly often on their attacks, right? Because
they're just so good at attacking.
Yes, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that's awesome.
Paired with this is it's harder to stack +1s. Like in Pathfinder 1e, it's like, you know, the best feat was weapon focused. As boring as that fucking is, right? Because just a raw +1 is so good, right? There's not a lot of raw +1s. In fact, there really aren't any that don't at least cost you some sort of action, and even then they're not easy to come by. Like the easiest way is an aid another check where another character spends one of their actions giving you a +2, right? And so that requires some amount of teamwork, and that's cool.
And
But
part of the idea, I'm assuming, is also that it's about like beating the AC. So, for instance, if I'm a fighter and I get in melee with an archer who has no armor, right? I'm going to crush the shit out of them,
yes,
right? Versus fighting another fighter who has full plate and is, relatively well armored, that kind of thing.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
And was there another thing to go on about here? Just like, so the other thing is that the other big kind of system level thing is that almost everything has a proficiency associated with it, which is untrained, trained, expert, master, legendary, and that's untrained is +0, trained is 2+ your level, expert is 4+ your level, master is 6+ your level, and legendary is 8+ your level. Everything scales with level, and that's a thing that you can optionally pull out of the system if you want, but it means that, like, you quickly outclass low level enemies, unlike D&D 5e, which just kind of has this bounded accuracy concept. If you want that, you can pull out that leveling mechanic. There is an alternate rule set for that. But
okay, that's interesting. So that would play more like 5e because your proficiency bonuses would go from what, +0 to +8 at the total. That looks a lot like D&D 5e, right? Yeah. Okay.
But like the proficiency bonus is kind of like for everything that you have like proficiency with, whereas it's per thing in PF2E, right? Like, big example, fighters are the only class that gets legendary in attacks, or
okay,
with most with weapon attacks, except for gunslingers with firearms, but that's like a special case. Paladin or champions, which are kind of like they're generic paladins. Because
we'll talk about that. Yeah.
They're the only ones that get legendary proficiency with armor, which is a little controversial because they have a lot of theming to them, right? Like they've got like a set fluff of like, being holy warriors to them. People weren't super happy about that, but I think the Guardian, which is the fight this class, will also get legendary with proficiency with armor.
What is it? So what would proficiency with this would just be to their AC, right?
Yeah, it's a bonus on top of the set AC, right?
Okay.
So like, I think leather gives you like +2, I want to say. And so if you're trained with it, you will get the 2 from the armor plus the 2 from your trained plus your level.
Okay.
This also has the interesting effect of at low levels, you can do things that you're untrained in pretty reasonably, or like
and at high levels you get fucked.
Yeah, right? Like you can maybe make a low, like, and theoretically this is like, well, climbing a ladder is a DC 5-ish, right? Or climbing like a wall with like good handles, a DC 5 athletics check, right? And so like anybody can reasonably do that even if they're untrained. But like climbing a kind of like sheer wall, right, is maybe DC 20 something, right? And so like, your fighter or your person who is trained or expert in it will be able to do it, but somebody who's untrained is never really going to be able to do that kind of thing.
Like if you're trying to succeed on a perception check against an invisible enemy and that check is like a 23, someone who has some level of proficiency, level 10 ranger, you have some level of proficiency in perception, you can probably make that check, but anyone attempting it untrained would never get there.
Yeah, the only thing I have to say there is like that is a decent example, but for that everybody has like perception is a stat, is no longer, it's not like a skill, it's like a separate stat, and everybody has some level of proficiency with it. No one has perception.
Really interesting. Yeah. Okay, well, we can talk about some of that in a minute. Okay, so everything has proficiencies. When it comes to casting side of things, does that interact with proficiencies?
So you have a proficiency in your, like, you have a spellcasting proficiency for your tradition. This lets you, like, like a wizard starts at trained and will eventually advance to expert, master, legendary. There's a pretty well-defined, sorry, Collins is crawling on my lap, if you could see his tail. Wizard has, like, the casters have a pretty well-defined track, and like the full casters will get there faster. The semi-full casters may never, I don't think, ever get fully there. Not to open up a whole other can of worms, but if you archetype into a caster class, you'll never be as good at casting as a as like a full caster, perhaps appropriately. But like, you know, then you make choices, right? Like maybe the fighter is, if the fighter who's taken, you know, an archetype of wizard, it's going to take more buff spells since, you know, he's not making things save, and he's not like, so excuse me, when you attack with a spell that requires like that's, so in older editions of D&D, like attacks delivered with a strike would maybe make you roll like a normal attack roll.
Okay.
90% of the time, it is this is now like a spell attack roll, which uses your spell casting stat and your spell casting proficiency, right?
Okay.
And
So even if I'm using Shocking Grasp, I'm not making a melee touch attack anymore. I am making a intelligence. If I'm a wizard, like I'm an intelligence spellcasting check to hit.
yeah, although Shocking Grasp is in the pre-remaster stuff, and it got changed post-remaster. Although
Fair
technically
enough. Okay,
the legacy
sure.
stuff is still valid.
I feel like that is going to be honestly the hardest part of this.
Yeah.
I am going to fuck that up so much.
How do actions work with familiars? This is actually super interesting for pet things. I think familiars work slightly differently, but most pet things, the way it works is they kind of get either one or kind of like a GM determined single action on their own, or you can spend one of your actions to give your pet or familiar 2 actions, right? So if you're playing a very pet focused class, you're going to be spending one of your actions to command your pet to do something.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a ranger. I use 1 action to attack with my bow, 1 action to move, and then 1 action to command my pet named Capricorn, and Capricorn can then move and attack,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, how do charges work? Are charges a rule?
So charges are a specific feat available to certain classes. Otherwise, it's just, you know, you can move and you can hit. But like this is actually a pretty good example of you get a lot of feats that are kind of like this thing you could simulate with actions, but at a slight advantage, right? Like, so like charge, I believe typically is a 2 action feat, right? Or it's a feat that you take and it gives you the option to take 2 actions to stride twice and attack at the end of it. Right.
Okay.
And so like you get a little bit of an advantage, right? Like that would normally take you 3 actions, so you do that.
Okay, so I do just want to hold for a second on proficiencies before we move on. How do proficiencies interact with skills?
Skills have proficiencies.
Okay, so what do I just get a certain number of proficient? Like, do I choose skills to be proficient in?
Yeah. So at level 1, you will get class set number plus plus intelligence modifier number of skills, or number of skills that you can bring to trained. There are level caps. Like I think it's level 3 when you can move skills to expert, and level 7 when you can move them to master, and like 15 when you can move them to legendary. Those are probably all slightly off, so don't quote me on any of that. But every other level, you get to a skill rank that you can use to either increase or train a new skill. Most are using it to improve, right? So you'll have a bunch at trained, and you'll have like 2 or 3 at expert, and then like you'll eventually have like 2 at legendary, I think.
Okay, interesting.
Except for rogues, which get skill ups every level, and I think maybe investigators, but yeah.
Oh, okay. So the idea theoretically with skills is that I'm choosing kind of my baseline and then just pumping them slowly kind of over time until I can get into higher proficiencies. Okay. On proficiencies, is there anything else about proficiencies that like interacts with like here's something I'm thinking about. Let's say I want to take some level of feat or something like that. Is this like a feat prerequisite thing as well where I have to have expert proficiency in attacking in order to take the charge feat or something along those lines?
So most feats that look like that, most class feats, right, which is what you're talking about with the charge feat,
okay,
those are going, so just step back 1 second. Most feats are tied to a specific, or most feats from the 1E sense are tied to a specific class, and some of them will like be like, you know, like 2 different classes will have the same feat, but like it's not like a wizard can't take charge normally, right? Like a wizard either has to, you know, archetype into fighter or something else that will give him access to charge. Those typically won't have those types of prerequisites because that's usually part of your core class progression, right? Like expert in attack is a thing that a fighter always gets, and so they're gated. It like any feat, it's like already kind of has that implicitly built in. Skill feats, which are a totally separate thing, those are tied to like proficiency rank, right? Like you have to be an expert in medicine in order to take battle medicine. Is an example. That kind of
So
thing.
I just want to quickly ask, same with saves. What is this?
Saves also have
saves
proficiencies.
Okay.
Yes.
And are saves fort reflex will, or
Yes.
are they by?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're fort reflex will.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
They still interact with your core ability scores.
Yes. Yeah.
So it comes from Constitution.
Yeah. So this is a very minor thing, but with the remaster, ability scores are no longer like 10 to 18 divide by 2, right, to get your modifier. They're just the modifier.
Okay, fair enough.
It's basically that's more removing cruft than it is kind of like getting away from something. You also up your abilities a lot more frequently than you do in 5e, or maybe at about the same rate if you're not using feats. It's more frequently because you get a bunch of them. At every 5 levels, you get 4 ability score ups, and they will raise them by raise that ability score by that bonus by 1 until you hit +4, and then it's 2 to go up, right? Like this is easier to explain using the traditional scores, but like in like normal D&D, it's like every 5 levels you get 4 +2s to distribute to your stats, but once you hit 18, they turn into +1s, right?
Okay, yeah, that certainly makes sense to me. So the idea would be that even at higher levels, I might end up with a 22 in strength or something like that, but I will be getting up to 18 with kind of everything, theoretically.
It not with everything, but like with if you spread it out, you will get probably +2 or +3 in everything, but you will probably have a couple stats that you really want to pump, and so they will be quickly at 18, and then a couple.
Okay. So like a paladin will probably take strength, con, charisma, or something.
Yeah, something
in
like
order
that.
to like get up there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That makes sense. Interesting. I guess we could talk a little bit about feats. So feats are a collection of feats are just when you get a cool ability that is called a feat now, right? So instead of having class features, we would just say you have class feats. Is that right?
Yes. Although there are class features that are not feats, right? But most of them are most class features that aren't feats are either boring, kind of like stat ups, right? Like like your fort save going from trained to expert is a class feature. It's not a feat. And everybody and everybody of that class kind of gets that. And there are a couple of templates for this too, right? Like a lot of classes will get their good save will jump to master. And with that, they will also, part of the rider on that ability will be like, if you roll a success, it upgrades to a critical success automatically. So this is like, it's really hard to do fortitude effects to marshals. It's really hard to do will effects. This is like uncanny dodge. But there's one of them for all 3 abilities, and most classes get a version of it at some point.
Okay, that makes sense. So like evasion for reflex, for instance,
that's what I want. Yeah.
I see exactly what you're saying. Okay. Okay, so then there are other feats for other things. So there are skill feats. Obviously, we haven't talked about ancestries yet. You don't have races, feats. You have ancestry feats, right? Are there other feat types that we ought to mention? So class, ancestry, skill, background feats maybe, or backgrounds?
So backgrounds give you skill feats typically.
Okay, fair enough.
There are general feats, which is this is a weird one, but this is where like you get a handful of these, and this is where like toughness and fleet, toughness gives you extra hit points. Fleet gives you an extra 5 feet of move speed. That's where these live. Typically, so your general feat slot can be spent on a general feat or a skill feat, but you can't spend your skill feat slots on general feats. And so the general feats tend to be like small, but like situationally powerful abilities, but you also tend to use them, at least in my experience, at the higher levels, you're using them on higher level skill feats, unless you have a particular thing that you particularly want to go for, right? Like this.
Okay, so theoretically, I'm leveling up. I'm leveling from 4 to 5. I probably am that is getting expressed mostly in feats, but maybe sometimes in class features, like my fort save might go up in proficiency. Is that correct?
Yeah. Just to wind back a second, the other big thing that tends to be a class feature is your subclass, which not every class gets, but it's like your rogue gets your racket, right? The rogue rackets are things like there's like one that's like, there's like thief, which is like your very stereotypical road. There's Mastermind, which is a little bit more intelligence based. It's a little bit more just as planned. There's Brute, which is more of a strength rogue, or I think it's Brute, something like that. And then there's like something I think that's like Acrobat, which is a little bit more acrobatic. And you get a handful of classes get this. Sometimes it's expressed a little bit differently. Like Wizard, that this will be your school. Sorcerer, this will be your bloodline, and you'll get it at level 1. Same thing with Wizard. But like your rogue racket, I think, comes in at level 2 or 3.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about classes, right? So it's gonna have the typical. Is it 12, 11 maybe? Really depends on kind of warlock, witch, I guess.
Yeah.
So our typical classes, we would have bard, barbarian, cleric, druid, right? Monk, what it would be? Ranger, rogue, wizard, fighter, paladin, sorcerer.
And then
it's like
the other core PF2E class is alchemist, which is like
that's a core class.
Yeah, that is in the core rulebook. This is kind of like, this is Paizo's special boy, and so alchemist is a core class, and goblin is a core ancestry, right?
Okay, cool. We talked a little bit about paladin being different. Paladin is champion.
Yes.
Can you help me out with that a little bit?
So this makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Before, paladin and like anti-paladin were separate things, right? Now they're both champions, and you might call the different aligned ones different things. Initially, there was going to be like one for each of the 9 squares. Now alignment doesn't exist because of the remaster, because that's too D&D. But you're kind of like sanctified is holy, unsanctified is unholy. So you're sanctified kind of, I forget what word they use. Your lawful good is a paladin. Your chaotic good is a liberator. Your neutral good has some other name, but like you get like, it affects their actions. There's like an
oh my god, liberator. That's pretty perfect. Yeah, so I remember I wrote a custom class for this. I wrote a chaotic evil paladin class called the Reaver. It had smite good, it had detect law, like that kind of stuff. How much does it interact with like alignment? If alignment doesn't exist, like, is smite a thing still?
Yeah, so smite is, I believe smite is still a thing, but it's like it's sanctified and unsanctified, so holy and unholy, right? Like it is kind of what it gets boiled down to. And then this only really apply, they kind of like back-ended it into champion because it's the only one that really has strong mechanics that tie to alignment like this. And so you get like a strike effect that's tied to what would have previously been chaos and law, or neutral. And so smite exists, it just might only affect like undead and demons. Your paladins get oaths now, which affect they're kind of, that's kind of like their subclass, right? Like there's like vengeance paladins, right? Which no, that might be a 5e thing
that is definitely a 5e thing.
I think there's something similar to that.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just click on champion so I can be sure of this. They're definitely anathemas, edicts and anathemas, that's what they're called. It's generally okay. So an edicts and anathemas are set by your deity or your cause. I don't think they strictly have to be gods. There's the gods are weird too, because like there's your core gods and there's like pantheons that you can pledge to. But that's all very setting specific, so I don't think it's worth going too deep into that. But they have said that with the remaster, they don't want anathemas to be kind of like you can't play the game anymore, so they're usually pretty flexible.
Okay, so I'm taking a look at this. I have looked it up. I guess this is Archives of Nethys. Is this the new D20P FSRD?
Yes, it is officially sanctioned by Paizo, so it is the official.
Okay, cool. That's cool.
Yeah,
I am seeing a number of different classes I have done. So, do you want to should we take a moment to just kind of run down some of these? Like, for instance, Animist, Exemplar,
So
They brought back Summoner. Do they still use Eidolons? Like,
yes, summoners still use Eidolons. Uh, Animist. I actually forget what Animist does. They're one of the
okay.
more occult. Like so, there was a whole book of occult classes, and I don't know them as quite as well.
Okay, so my expectation would be inventor, or I'm sorry, investigator would be a cult. Psychic would be a cult.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
psychic is your full occult caster. Um,
Okay. What
investigator
about
is more kind of like investigator is less occult and is more like your the part of the rogue. It's like a detective, and it's kind of like the rogue skill monkey, like pushed more towards skill monkey. If
Oh,
that
okay.
makes sense.
I remember Rogue. It was the original hybrid class between Rogue and Alchemist. Does it still have concoctions?
I think that is one of its subclasses, but it is more kind of like it has its own identity in this. It doesn't. It gets a thing called the studied strike, which is like not a not a sneak attack. It's like you pre-roll your attack, right? And so you know like what the result is going to be. And if it's like a 2, you just don't attack. Instead, you like you go do something else with your action. It's not exactly action efficient, but it gives you some bonuses on the to hit.
Okay.
Um,
And then question from the chat, is Gunslinger one of the base classes? It doesn't sound like it, but
well, it's not one of the core classes, but it is. There are no non-base. Every class is a base class.
so there are no more hybrids theoretically.
Yeah. I mean, like you could look at them and be
Okay.
like, this seems like a cross between X and Y, right? But, uh, uh, Summoner still looks like some wild. It's really tempting to go because it's fun to play. Managing more than a handful of summons can also suck. Summoner doesn't summon a lot of things typically. It summons it has its one Eidolon, which is its big summon, right? That's your thing that you give an action to do, give it 2 actions, right? It gets better action economy off of that because it is the dedicated pet class. And it also gets all of the summon spells, but you're typically not going to summon more than 2 things in a battle at most. And even then, right, like you just don't have the actions to invest in your pet. Like, theoretically you could summon
even if you
three
summon 6 things, you wouldn't be able to have 6 actions to
yeah
get all of them, right?
yeah
Okay.
and I believe summon things kind of get less free stuff, right? Like I think most summons don't get the free action if you don't do anything. They just kind of stand around if you don't do anything. But
Okay.
that's
I
go on. Sorry.
I do want to ask about Thaumaturge. What's that one?
Okay, so Thaumaturge is, and I know this because one of the people in the game I play plays this. They get like it's a cult. They get like implements. They're like cursed objects type of deal, and they can invoke them, and they're like a midcaster, right? And like they do things like put mild curses on people. They get like spell strikey looking type, not spell strike, but like spell like spell effects, like cantripy looking things. They are very particular. And again, not something it is very occult. It is very kind of like I have found these objects of power and I'm going to exploit them. That's the theme, right? Like I'm going to exploit these objects of power to defeat my enemies. They get like their core thing I think is called exploit weakness, which is like you can find out your enemies weaknesses, and if they don't have a like one on paper, you kind of get a personal one. It's like the Thaumaturge can exploit their weakness specifically and deal a little bit of extra damage there, that kind of thing.
Okay, interesting. Are there any extra like things on the class side that you want to get into? Like, what are some of the core differences between a Pathfinder version of, let's say, Monk maybe, and the PF2E version of Monk? If you have any of that kind of stuff off the top of your head, not necessarily for Monk, obviously, but just like any of the classes.
So the big ones I would point out is that so which is your warlock essentially, right? It's flavored slightly differently, or like the mechanics are slightly different more than the flavor. Like your warlock, like your patron, kind of gives you its spells through your familiar, which is a big witch feature. I will sorcerers. So the magic system has 4 big schools: arcane, occult, primal, and
Divine?
divine. Thank you. Yeah. You know, druids are primal, clerics are divine, wizards are arcane, and like bard is the core occult class, but psychic is maybe a little bit more iconic, I would say. If I would say that bard, it feels like they made bard occult just to have something that had occult in the core rulebook. But something to note is that sorcerers switch their or sorcerers have a different tradition based on their bloodline. So like
Okay.
a draconic sorcerer is arcane. An imperious sorcerer, which is kind of like, from like the blood of conquerors, is arcane. A angelic sorcerer is divine. A like I think there's like a music-y sorcerer, and that's a cult. And like there's a couple of nature ones that are primal, that kind of thing, right? They all map it kind of how you would expect.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Yeah. Are there still sort of like, so for instance, if I play a champion or I play a ranger, am I accessing primal versus accessing divine? Like, is that kind of like, this is the marshal with a dip of spellcasting in a certain thing?
So, this will bring us. So there are. This will bring you to another interesting thing. You know how like warlocks in 5e get like 2 spells per short rest typically, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of classes have access to something like this. It's called focus points in your focus pool, right?
Okay.
So like a lot of full casters will also get them, but like these kind of mostly martial with a diff of spellcasting, instead of getting a spellcasting list, they will get a feat that will grant them a focus spell and a focus point to spend on them. And so like a gravity weapon, I believe, is a ranger focus spell, right? You take that feat, you get a focus. It will grant you a focus point. If you already have a focus pool, it'll usually grant you a second focus point. And you can spend your focus points on any of your focus spells. And it will give you like a single spell effect, and you get your focus points back by spending 10 minutes meditating. It changes per class, right? Like clerics pray, rangers, I guess, monks meditate because like key strikes are focus spells. But part of this is that for the kind of like marshals with a dip, don't necessarily take these feats, right? Like a monk might not have any focus points because they might not take any of the key feats, right? A ranger might not have a focus pool because they might not take any of the ranger spells.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
So it sounds to me like these are a little bit more. So here's sort of a metaphor that I'm imagining. In Pathfinder or in D&D 5e, we would maybe say that is sort of a curated, kind of like a curated menu, right? Where you show up to the restaurant and you're just going to get your 5-course kind of meal, and you order that you order that by showing up to the restaurant, right? When you walk into, like, it's like on Valentine's Day or something, right? Like, and they do a
Pre-fee,
pre-fee, yeah, pre-fee menu kind of thing, right? You go, I'm going to play the rogue, and the rogue gets or I'm sorry, you say, I'm going to play the thief subclass, and that just basically defines the rest of your boop, 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 boop. It'll all come in when it comes in kind of down the line. It sounds as though like Pathfinder is a little bit more like a traditional sort of menu setup where, you are building out your character, and obviously there's going to be stuff that synergizes, right? I imagine that if I'm playing a thief rogue, I'm probably focused a little bit more on the dex side of things, right? And I'm trying to probably like curate. And so if you give 10 people the task of making a thief rogue, 9 of them are going to make pretty similar kind of characters, right? But the core sort of feat progression is something that you need to put together on sort of your own, and you get to figure that out however that would sort of make sense. Would this be an okay way of describing the difference between the two systems?
Yes, I think that's very fair. In the chat, Karif asks, is there Shepherd's Circle style druid where you can do the Pack of Wolves style thing? There is a druidic, they're called orders, and there's an animal order. I don't remember how much it lets you get pack style things, but I think there's an archetype that lets you get multiple animal companions, which is a whole other thing. Do you want me to go into archetypes?
Yeah, let's talk about archetypes, because this is definitely part of our exploration.
So, something that 1E was very famous for are like a billion archetypes, which are like how you modify your base class. Instead of it being like per class, now it is they're all kind of universal. And Sorry. And so they that lets you build out like so by core, these you can take your archetype. It comes with a dedication, which gives you some minor benefit, and then lets you take you feats in that path, and these replace your class feats. At every time you would get a class feat, you have the option of selecting an archetype. And the way they stop the kind of like weird cheese that you used to get from multi-classing by taking like single levels of things is you have to take at least 2 feats in your archetype before you can select another archetype. Um, uh, Part of this too, or on top of this, a very common variant that people play with is called free archetype, which is instead of replacing your class feats, you just get starting at level 2, you get an archetype, you get an extra feat slot when you would get a class feat that you can spend only on archetype stuff. This is how you multi-class. So every core class gets every class gets a archetype version that gets you some pared down level, and they look fairly formulaic. It's something like you get like a couple of like skill feats with the dedication, or a couple of skills with the dedication, and then like you'll for spellcasting ones, it'll be like you spend a feat and you get level 0 and level 1 spells, level 0 being cantrips. And then at level like 5 or 7, you can take the one that'll give you level 2 and 3 spells, that kind of thing.
Okay, that's pretty interesting.
Most of them also have one that's like, take a level 1 or 2 class feat from that class, and then another one that's like, take, pick a class feat. Your level counts as half, like take half your level for the purposes of qualifying for it, right? So like a level 8 fighter with a wizard archetype could take a level 4 or lower wizard class feat with that feat, that kind of thing.
Okay, so I want to understand, and this is part of this is a little bit less explaining the system, a little bit more talking about the design side of things. The free archetype, why is it so common? What is the like meta around that aspect of the game? Why, like, that's what I'm interested in.
So part of it is that it doesn't give you a lot of extra power, right? Like it mostly gives you options. It's not because there's not a lot of plus ones. It's not like you're stacking bonuses, so it doesn't really throw off the power balance too much, which is one half of it. The other half of it is it really kind of like fleshes out character concepts without kind of sacrificing too much of your core stuff thing, right? So like one of the archetypes is archer, right? This is the other thing, like beyond the multi-class things, there are also like a character that I play is a wizard that takes the martial artist archetype, right? Which is kind of like it's not monk, but it's kind of like it's just like unarmed punching, right? So that lets me be pretty decent at doing unarmed strikes without sacrificing any of my wizard shit, right? And so it's not really broken because it's not like, it's not giving me any extra actions, right? Like instead of casting a spell, I'm punching something, and I'm probably worse at punching something than I am at casting spells, but it's a thing that I want to do and I like to do, so it's mostly fine, right? Or if you want to be an arcane archer, right? Like that might be a bad example because I think there's a specific arcane archer archetype. But if you want to be a wizard that like an elf wizard, you have the proficiency with longbows, right? Like I would like some additional archery stuff. You take the archer archetype and lets you do the occasional archer thing. This part of the way this manifests is like spells are mostly 2-action things, right? So it's like I will cast a 2-action spell and I will shoot an arrow, that kind of thing, right? And it kind of enables that without it being too broken.
Okay, that's interesting to me. Does every class have an archetype? So could I take archetypes in weird stuff like thaumaturge or
Yes.
alchemist?
Every class has an archetype for it.
Do most people choose classes for their archetypes, or do they choose these generalist ones?
I think more people choose the generalist ones, partly because they are less restrictive to get into, and they're a little bit more flavorful, right? Like, in order to do like there's like a 2-weapon fighter, like or a dual weapon warrior archetype, right? Like a fighter can take this. Fighter might not take it because they have a lot of those options core to their class. But if they wanted to do that and take like the some of the more generalist feats, that would open up an option for that. A rogue might take it because they're dual wielding. A swashbuckler might take it because they're dual wielding. And I think they've got some core support for it, but like maybe they want to mostly focus on doing their swashbuckler nonsense. You know, in a weirder choice like a cleric of the red mantis god, which is like this assassin god, and they all use these two, they dual wield sabers, right? Might take it because it's very flavorful, and even though most of their casting spells, right, like doing the two saw blades is like a cool thing that they want to do, that kind of thing. Or like another one is Bastion, I think is the name of it. One of them is for shields, one of them is for armor, but it's like, fighters can take this nifty feat that's raise a shield on reaction, so you don't have to spend one of your 3 actions to do it. You can't block if you do that. Eventually, the Bastion gets the ability to both raise and block on with. They get an extra reaction to shield block with. But like if you were a wizard that wanted to use a shield, you would take like Bastion as an archetype type stuff.
Okay.
And so, like, as opposed to your elven wizard with the longbow, right? Like, your elven wizard with the longbow is casting and shooting a shot. Your shield wizard is casting a spell and raising a shield instead, right? Like that kind of thing.
Okay. I guess I see this. And you would argue to me personally, for our 2e game, I want to do this inherent archetype thing.
I think it's super fun. I don't know. I know Josh and I know Ryan, but I've never played D&D with Ryan. It can be a lot.
Yeah, it is. There's like a level of choice. So there's 2 pieces of this. Number one, I'm always going to be doing my special artifacts way of doing items, and we'll talk about items in a bit. And so I'm always going to be introducing more power to a game that allows people to sort of specialize. And this is my instinct. My instinct is, you know what, buddy, you are designing sort of these extra skill trees for players. So that takes up this this kind of takes up the slot that would normally go to a free kind of like archetype, just baseline, based on everything I've sort of like heard so far. There's the extra piece of this, which is that I'm opting into a new system. There's going to be a lot of choices, and the idea that somebody has to make an additional choice about, oh my God, what is the second class I'm gonna multi-class into, kind of, sort of, not quite, but a little bit almost, right? Is like pretty complicated. But the third thing, the countervailing force, is I am a big fan of allowing players to customize, and especially customizing at low power I care about, right? So in I explained this last time in D&D, in my D&D 5e games, right? Like I like to give a free background to people from the old 2014 backgrounds, right? In 2024 backgrounds carry more kind of heft, but they're a little bit more sort of mechanically kind of like streamlined, and I want to go back to some of those RP focused backgrounds, and just giving somebody something like that sounds a lot to me like giving someone a free archetype to allow them to more accurately kind of represent the model of their character in their head. So those are sort of my 3 thinking pieces, which is kind of like 2 against 1 for, if that makes sense. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So the nice thing about this is that you don't have to decide immediately. Free archetype
Really
kicks in
okay
at level 2, right? There are a couple of exceptions where like you're supposed to pick the archetype at level 1, but this is for like very specific, like there's like an elementalist wizard that gets like an alternate spell list, but like these are so weird and specialized that I wouldn't recommend anybody playing for the first time try and play it anyway, right? Like
okay
the only person that would want to do that is somebody like me, and I will talk to you about that if that's something I want to do. And I probably won't
true.
for the sake of this.
So here's a question: do you think that it would make sense for me to express these magic items the way that I talk about them, right? Like as archetypes, essentially?
You could, yeah. So like, what one of the ways that you can play free archetype is like, let me like, this is a sailing campaign, and so everybody's free archetype is like sailor or something like
Mhm.
that, right? Um, and that's less kind of like filling out your character, and more kind of like, oh, this is a fun thing for the campaign, or like um, one of them, or like in the Mark game I'm playing, right? There's, I think, a ghost archetype, and that's like it's so another thing is that everything has rarity tags, right? And so like
Right.
anything that is not common, the expectation is you have to, at the very least, ask the GM for permission to take it, right? This is kind of normal Rule Zero stuff, but with like a mechanical force behind it, so that like it helps GMs be like, the rules say that you have to ask me first, right? Like we've talked about this when it came out. So like Ghost is an uncommon or a rare archetype, and so the expectation is you normally can't just take it, but like your character dies, but you really want us to keep playing it. Maybe I'll take the Ghost archetype, right? Like, or something like that, or like events transpire in the campaign such that makes sense. That makes sense as an archetype, that kind of thing. Um, so you can do it that way.
Just to be clear, did Mark homebrew this ghost rule, or is
No.
this something that's in the game?
This is part of the predetermined adventure path that we're playing.
Okay.
And I don't want to say more because it is kind of a spoiler for that adventure path.
Sure.
But you could flavor these item things as archetypes, right? Like that would be a perfect that would slot in relatively nicely there, right? Like that would make sense. Part of the thing there is that like understanding the math there is a little bit tougher. Like you read enough of them and you understand like what the appropriate power level is, right? Like you read enough of these and you'll be like you can kind of like what's it like it's like a cipher in the Matrix, right? It's like I can see the code, right? Like you start reading enough of these, it's like, oh, this is one of those that like gives you a strike and a maneuver before multi-attack penalty throws in, right? That's what this feat does, right? And like that's like a thing that kind of like I can tell you that because I've read these a bunch. You wouldn't know that because you haven't read a ton of them, but like
but is it typically like there are a number of different feats you can, so let's say for instance I take the martial artist archetype. Does it just give me it doesn't give me the feats in order, it shows me a menu and I get to choose my favorite, right?
Yeah, so it gives you get a number of feats, or you have a number of feat options at different levels. A lot of them will pull feats out of the classes, right? Like martial artist, I think, gets a couple of fighter feat or a couple of monk feats that you can choose out of them, type of deal. But they're optional, and then they have feats that are exclusive to their
because I do think it does sound actually like this would be a pretty straightforward way of implementing kind of my system. But the problem is that my system is deterministic, right? When I make the artifacts do a specific thing, and they only do that thing. And the choice you have to upgrade them is about, so for instance, just to use an example from Warriors of Kryn, right? So Siri is playing Calidus. Calidus is a ranger. He's a beast mastery ranger. So one of his archetypes is the thing you summon is better and cool. Your animal companion is better, right? One of them is your weapon mastery is better. You're shooting guys with your bow. You get to do cool stuff with your weapon mastery. And the third one is your hunter's mark is better. It's about increasing kind of the value and danger of managing your hunter's mark kind of like effectively. And these are obviously flavored, right? The nature one is flavored towards the forest and stuff like that. The other one is a black ranger thing because it comes from sort of like the dark ranger side of thing from WoW. And the last one is flavored sort of for the dragons, the metallic kind of like dragons or whatever. But like I already know if I were to upgrade Sarian's item, the black arrow, today, I could get it all. I could tell you this is what it does at uncommon, this is what it does at rare, this is what it does at legendary, right? That wouldn't be well represented in an archetype, it doesn't sound like, because archetypes you get a feat and you would choose from one of a number of things, and at that point the kind of overhead that I would have to take care of in order to make 15 of these, it's not just making 15 sort of mechanics paths for a thing, it is making 15 mechanics pools for a thing, which is a little more wild.
So I will say that there are a number of archetypes that don't really have options to them, right?
Okay.
Like some of the ones that are kind of more flavorful and less kind of like, you know, mechanical, like something like Sailor will mostly just have one option at each level spot, maybe two at one point, right? And so like it is not such a bad match there.
What hold on one second. What if you said you get one archetype feat and you put that into any archetype that you have theoretically? What if I gave somebody 3 archetypes all at once and each of those archetypes had one feat line to it, right? With each feat have a prerequisite of the previous feat, right? But when you leveled up and you got your archetype feat, you could only choose one of the 3. Theoretically, that would actually mechanically match what I'm describing for D&D.
Yes, something like that. I mean,
Okay.
I would say that if you want to go down this road, don't like marry yourself to like really like, you know, putting yourself into this mold, because you're the GM. You can bend the rules however you want, right? And like, you know, trying to like force it into this art, because like you'll also get into weird things that like I like to do, which is like you could also take an archetype feat in your main class slot, right? So like I have on my cleric in the game where I think we're turning level 20 soon, right? Like there have been a couple of levels where like I didn't have a great cleric feat that I wanted to take, so I took an additional archetype feat in my class feat slot. So I got 2 archetype feats, I think like level 16 or 18, right?
It's really interesting. Yeah.
And
Especially because I think of my items as being more power. Like I don't balance these items again. I balance the items kind of against each other in a way, but I don't balance them against like I can't balance my these crazy item feats that are supposed to be very synergistic with your class and the choices you're making as part of your playstyle against the obviously correct thing to do every time would be to max out all of your items to legendary as quickly as possible, I think.
I would say for you, do the items the way you do the items, and like, you know, make the archetype decision independent of that, right? Like
okay. That's interesting. What would you say? Well, okay, I'm sorry. We're on archetypes. Before we move off archetypes, is there anything else that you wanted to
just
hit on here?
To wind all the way back to Sarian's original question, there is an archetype called Beastmaster where like the whole thing is having a bunch of stuff, right? Like the level 4 additional companion feat is like another animal joins you, travels as a young animal companion with the minion trait. Minion is the thing that means you give it you spend an action to give it 2 actions. You can select this feat more than once, getting additional animal companion each time, to a total of 4 companions from all sources, right? So
you can spend your whole turn giving actions. You can spend 3 actions to get 6. That's mango. That's so many actions.
Yeah. But you know, so the balancing factor there is that all 3 of your animal companions probably aren't at like, you know, an apex animal companion, right? Like they're probably not, you know, like level 2, that might be a little bit busted, but, or, you know, level 4 or whatever, it might be a little bit busted, but level 10, 2 of your animal companions are probably going to be doing a little bit less, right? Like this, just an example, in the game I'm playing, the gunslinger has like a mechanical dog as like, I think, got it from like an archetype, of some sort. And, the dog occasionally gets a grapple off, but like mostly doesn't do a lot, right? Like, you know, doesn't have a ton of impact on the fights, but is a fun thing to play around with, that kind of thing.
Okay, I want to talk about ancestries. This is another part of like, if we're talking about character creation, what are the core differences between selecting my race in D&D versus selecting my ancestry in Pathfinder?
So 1, ancestries get feats, right? Every 3 levels, I want to say. And they can be, depending on your ancestry, they can be pretty defining, right? Like, the crow people, I think, get like some limited ability to call lightning, that kind of thing. Although they're in what's it called? An uncommon ancestry, I believe. The other thing is that Um, ancestries get this thing called a heritage, and a heritage is kind of like your defining thing for your ancestry, right? So like, um, like this is the difference between like your high elves and your wood elves, right? Like that would be a heritage, right? Um, on top of this, there are several universal heritages. This is how you get your half elves and half orcs. Although they're called something different now because of the WotC thing. The half orcs are called Dromar, and I think half elves and half orcs might just be human heritages, which is bad. It makes it bad example. Asimir and tieflings, which are called Nephilim. They're two different types of Nephilim. They're a universal heritage, right? So like
Okay.
your orc could be a Nephilim orc, right? There's a dragon one that's universal heritage. There's I think a couple of genie ones that are universal heritage. There's a fate touched one that's universal heritage, and this kind of enables some level of like specific character concept, right? So if you wanted to be like, the descendant of a genie, right, at some level, you could take that universal heritage, and you put that on top of your core kind of ancestry stuff. So, you get less stock. Like two different elves can look a lot different from each other based on their feat changes. They will both have low light vision, but they won't necessarily both have longbow proficiency, right? That is an ancestry feat is something like most ancestries have a like ancestry weapon familiarity, and this is where you get your like your kind of like elves are good with bows and longswords type thing, right? Which is I think it's pretty clever. The way it works is it turns so there's 3 levels of weapons. There's simple weapons, martial weapons, and advanced weapons. It makes all for the purposes of proficiency. It makes all martial weapons into simple weapons and all advanced weapons into martial weapons. So like it means your elf wizard can't use an elven curd blade, which is an advanced weapon, as easily because he doesn't have any martial proficiency. But the longbow and the longsword, which are martial weapons, they get turned into simple weapons for him, and he has simple weapon proficiency because he's a wizard. And so
This also means that it's not like I roll an elf ranger because I'm stacking my elf longbow proficiency with my class longbow proficiency or something like that, right? Like it just makes it easier to access for kind of off classes, basically.
Yeah, or like
Okay.
or like I said, like if you wanted to really use an advanced, like an advanced ancestry weapon, that's a way to do it. But you don't have to. You avoid the kind of like wasted slot there, right? Like as your elf ranger probably doesn't need to take that unless it wants proficiency, or it wants to get the advanced proficiency.
How do you normally get advanced proficiencies?
Be a fighter.
Okay.
Is the answer.
That's awesome. I actually quite like this version of. I am a big fighter enjoyer, obviously, given my choice in World of Warcraft, and I guess I'm also currently playing a fighter in Frank's game. So it sounds like being a fighter is actually pretty sweet in Pathfinder 2e. You get a lot of stuff.
It's be a fighter or be a human, because humans get like pick a single one type thing. Or
cool.
or be a member of an ancestry where that weapon is part of that ancestry stuff, right?
Okay, and then also just like as a matter of kind of core, ancestries are like more about upbringing than about sort of species, right? So for instance, this is something I remember from the playtest. The idea is that if you are a human raised by elves, you take the elven ancestry because it's more about like you got brought up by the elves, right? Or something like that.
I would say that that's not quite right. Like there's a mix
Oh, really?
there. There's a mix there, but like actually I think it's a general feat called adopted ancestry, which basically lets you take feats from the from a different ancestry.
Okay. Is there a dragonborn ancestry? I think we talked about kobold.
So this is the thing that made me very angry. Kobolds used to have a lot of dragon feats, and they got all rolled out of kobold and into the dragon universal heritage, right?
Oh, okay, okay. So if somebody were to play a Dragonborn, 'cause, like, obviously Dragonborn have a very core piece of my campaign setting that we are playing because it is built for D&D, right?
Right.
But someone would be able to take that universal dragon heritage and essentially just be playing a Dragonborn. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Like you would like it can have as much effect on like the way you look as you want, right? Like you could just be like, have a little bit of skills where you could look like a dragon, but the way I would like if you wanted to do it purely by the rules, I would say something like, a human with the dragon with the dragon versatile. They're called versatile heritage. Is your kind of dragonborn, or maybe a hobgoblin, because hobgoblin has that kind of military. Actually, given the way you just tried to dragonborn, I would say that the best way to build dragonborn would be hobgoblins with the dragon blood versatile heritage.
Okay. What if I wanted to be a Dragonborn with deadly acidic blood that harms my enemies? I don't know if that's possible, but I bet you guys are probably gonna fight stuff that looks like that.
I would say deadly acidic blood. There might be an ancestry that has a feature like that. I don't know off the top of my head, but that sounds like a thing.
I am now looking at ancestries. There seem to be quite a lot that are in the so the only one in here that doesn't make sense to me on a core level is Leshy, nature spirits. These are just plant people, it seems like.
They're like little plant things. They're like small, like imagine like a living gourd. It's like one version of them. There's also like but like that's size.
A common ancestry.
It's like a new thing, but yeah, like they this is another like very special Paizo boy thing, right? Like
okay, yeah. So what if halflings, but whatever.
More like what if goblins, but plants, right?
Okay. Okay.
But like there's all sorts of weird stuff like like one of the rare ancestries is awakened animal. So like this is like if you remember the Sir Barrington thing, right? Like the Sir Barrington meme, you could do Sir Barrington with awakened animal.
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah, I also see android in here, automaton. Maybe this would be like warforged, I guess.
Yeah,
flesh warp.
Flesh warp.
Jesus.
Is a that's like a body horror thing. Like anything under rare is like supposed to be like is either like an adventure path thing, which is like Shuni. Shunis are like pug people. They're very cute, but they are like it's weird. But like skeleton is also here, right? Like I would say that if I were running my first game of this, I would say limit it to common with talk to me about uncommon type deal, right?
Okay. Like yeah, because there's some in here in like Tengu. I recognize Tengu. Those were in Pathfinder 1E, right?
Yeah.
Kitsune were in Pathfinder 1E. Those are in uncommon. And there's also some stuff that would like dovetail pretty reasonably, right? Lizard folk, there's obviously lizardmen. Not that you're allowed to play them, but it's just like it would make a certain amount of sense. Or you could imagine in a game with like WoW, you have Minotaur, and we just call that Tauren, right? Something along those kinds of lines. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No, it's funny to me because like for whatever reason in fantasy games, especially like Minotaur in like the Galarian world, I think it's supposed to be like part of their culture is like building labyrinths. Is like that kind of doesn't match the original thing, right? Like they're trapped in the labyrinth in the
yeah.
But that's some of the like weirder ancestries kind of get like there's like I think there's a centaur ancestry, right? Like they get a little bit out there, but they'll kind of work.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely see myself making ancestries. Like for instance, Leonin is a pretty important one that might not be well represented by catfolk, for instance. Like Leonin in 5e have certain kinds of rules that I sort of built that whole flavor around. But I would imagine that catfolk are maybe like more like nimble rather than more heroic and ferocious, right? And so like I could definitely see myself do something along those kinds of lines, but in general I sort of see I guess I sort of see all of these except for really Leshy as being pretty easily accessible, right? I have built in rules for basically all of these just kind of naturally.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And like leshies are weird. You don't really need to do
Okay.
leshies.
Okay, the last thing that would be part of character creation probably is like backgrounds, right?
Uh, yes. Backgrounds are usually so there are a bunch of universal ones that are like artisan or pilgrim, right? And they usually have like a mild unique effect plus a lore, plus a normal skill plus a lore plus a limitation on your abilities. So when you're generating a character, your ability scores are um determined by like essentially you go through this flow where it's like your class's core ability score gets a bonus. You get your ancestry. Alternatively, you either get to choose two for free. That's like kind of like the new we don't want to imply that certain races are stupid thing, or you get two. The classic way is two bonuses and a malice. Um, uh, the then you get like four free choices, and then you get two from your background, which I think is universally pick one of two and then one free choice, right? So like blacksmith will probably give you like constitution and strength and then a free choice or something like that.
Okay.
And then you get a lore skill. So lore skills, just to go over this real quickly, this is kind of like your remember we talked about a system for like giving characters that aren't normally well equipped to like do social interactions like a tag that they could do something with.
Yeah.
This is kind of like that, but for recall knowledge type checks. It's like so a lore skill is supposed to be something relatively narrow that you have expertise in that you would know something about, right? So like lore blacksmithing means that you know a bunch about blacksmithing, and if there's a question that comes up about blacksmithing, you can roll against it. It's not supposed to
Yeah,
be
so I'm seeing that one of the backgrounds is barkeep and they have alcohol lore, which would make sense. You walk into a bar and I go, okay, I want to know what the most expensive, thing to order would be, and you could roll an alcohol lore check in order to make that. That makes sense to me for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And then deities, I assume, would have lore checks. So you like a very easy thing in something like Sauron would be I could have lore Cyrexis, and just anything that relates to Cyrexis. I'm expressing that through a lore check.
Yeah. So like a lore deity is like something about your god, whereas like religion is kind of like universe. Like the deity ones get a little bit weird because theoretically they're subsumed by religion. Theoretically, they're all kind of subsumed by one of the big four, which are, oh no, it's not quite. There's nature, occult, arcane, and religion, which map to the four magical traditions. But there's also societies. You're kind of like knowledge about like people in the world. And there's a couple others too, but most of them theoretically, when you say recall knowledge on this particular thing, you should have like a main skill to roll for it, but somebody might pipe up and be like, oh, can I apply swamp lore to this, right? Like, can I apply merchant lore to this, right? And you will say yes or no, or like, what's one that comes, I have a character that like, it's like the son of a merchant, right? And so occasionally something will come up and it'll be like, this is like, a bejeweled sword, right? And like, it'll be like an arcane check to figure out how magical it is. But like, I might be like, can I roll merchant lore to know something about maybe the provenance of it or like, the value of it, right? It's like, okay, that makes sense, right? That
yeah,
kind of
I get that. I get that for sure. That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay.
That's also where you get room for a lot of kind of like flexibility, cool stuff, right? Like, oh, my dad was, a fisherman. I will take fisherman's lore, that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay. That also makes sense to me. I don't know if there's other questions that I should be asking. Is there anything else about PF2E that we ought to talk about that we haven't hit in terms of its core mechanics or character creation or maybe character progression? Is there some aspect to character progression that I'm not really
Oh, okay. So
tracking?
items. So
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, obviously, I talked about wanting to use the item replacement, right?
yeah, yeah. So like you're expected to get a certain number of items. There is a replace that like in 1E there was called the Big Seven, right? Like it just turned out kind of like there were 7 things that you always wanted to have. Um,
Yeah, like a cloak of resistance, ring of deflection,
yeah,
ring of whatever. Yeah, like all that stuff.
that's all fairly systematized now, and like it's expected that you will get your +1 weapon around level 2 or 3, and that's done by +1 runes. But you can just replace that with the automatic bonus progression, which does some slight, like I think I mentioned this last time, does some slight tweaks to power if you do that right, because like theoretically, if you wanted to use both a longsword and a dagger, you would need 2 separate +1 runes, and under the automatic bonus progression, you just kind of get both for free. But I don't think it's that much of a big deal.
Yeah, I would never want to adjudicate that. This is part of why I redesigned magic items to be my magic item kind of like thing. I like the idea that someone, and I just don't think that anybody really connects with stuff to that level, right? Like nobody cares about nobody bonds with their +1 rune, but like Josh has 1000% bonded with the Giga Sword, the big gigantic sword that has this special gameplay mechanic that
Sure.
he won by kicking some guy's ass and stealing his gigantic fucking sword, right? Like that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. And I also just don't think that, you know, I don't think that there's a lot to grab onto when it like this is part of my thing about +1 swords suck. Like I don't think anybody really cares about a +1 sword really. And if you yeah, I don't know. It's really just like
Yeah,
the only piece of this is the thing that you talked about, which is like there are the weird magic items that aren't quite very like like that you wouldn't want to build an artifact around that do a weird thing that is sometimes useful, like a ring of jumping or something like that.
yeah, or like a cloak of the mountebank, or like
Yeah,
boots of striding
yeah.
and stepping or whatever, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I would want to in 5e, the way my system works in 5e, you kind of remove that capability from players because you're theoretically taking all 3 attunement slots with these super powerful giga artifacts, right? Nobody would ever want to swap out one of their artifacts for a ring of protection or a ring of jumping or kind of like whatever else, but I am definitely sensitive to the idea that like, yeah, giving somebody a weird item like a necklace that turns their head into a skeleton and then they can cast Speak with Dead once a day for free or something like that. Like, yeah, sure. I can 1000% see an item like that be something that's really like cool and interesting. So, it's what it is.
Yeah, so just so you understand the scope of the scale, D&D 5e is attuned to 3 items, right? The standard, it's called investing in PF2E, and the standard is 10. For PF2E, yeah.
Jesus. Okay. Well, it's a lot.
Yeah. But part of this also is like it would pull like it's not like your weapons, but like your armor, I believe you invest in, right? Like in like that'll like, take one of your slots, and it is like, a lot of that's like standard like +3 armor, plus the flavorful stuff. So part of the function of the fundamental runes, which is these like +1s things, is that it also affects the more flavorful kind of property runes, which are like flaming, right? Even though flaming's kind of boring, but like, that kind of thing, right? Like if you have a +1 fundamental rune, right? You can put 1 property rune on. If you've got a +2, you can put 2 property runes on, that kind of thing. The other thing is that the other fundamental rune is striking for weapons, and it's like this is part of like it will be handled by the automatic bonus progression, but it's part of the damage model. Is at a certain point your weapons will deal multiple dice worth of damage, right? Like a standard dagger deals like 1d6, a striking dagger a +1 striking dagger deals 2d6.
Oh, interesting. Instead of 1d6 +1.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the same modifiers, right? Like instead of 1d6 +1, it'll be 2d6 plus 1.
Oh, okay.
It adds another weapon die, but the automatic bonus progression should handle that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
My sense is that the high levels get really out there in terms of just inflation of stuff.
in terms of what do you mean by inflation of stuff?
It seems as though at level 10, characters are going to be dealing pretty high amounts of damage. You're going to be rolling pretty high on sort of your dice. So, for instance, if I'm talking in D&D 5e terms, right, we've addressed this a little bit. In Pathfinder 1e, the base attack bonus, the more you get of it, the more, not just the more often you hit, but actually the more you diminish the power of the die itself, of the D20 itself, right? Because if I roll a nat 17, right, and I have a +3, the contribution of the 17 is much, much higher, right? If I roll a nat 17, but I have a +17, the contribution of my dice is now down to 50-50, right? It used to be 80+%, right? Of my hit was coming from my die roll. Now 50% of my hit comes from my die roll, right? Even if something has an AC of 30 or something like that. Do you know what I mean? And I'm just thinking about it in those kinds of terms.
Everything scales. Everything scales together, right? So AC. So that is true for things that you are good at in a way that I think is positive, right? Like a fighter, the dice will matter less to hit. It'll come into it because
you can always crit.
Yeah, because you can 10 up crit, right? Like but like your let's say your wizard who really likes stabbing things with his dagger, right? He will be at about the die will matter about the same through most of his levels. Because he doesn't have a lot of great ways to upgrade the way he stabs. There might be some ways to specialize around the edge, but just take a core wizard, right? That doesn't take any archetypes. Just really likes to get that dagger in there, right? The die will be about the same. It will be a little bit less because he might upgrade from trained to expert with his dagger. If he's casting cantrips, which is probably what what the game wants him to do, right? He will be, the die will matter less there, but that's that is what it is.
Yeah, something that Sarius says, it feels like it riffs off the inherently satisfying RPG thing of building a gear progression as part of character growth.
Yes,
I guess this was part of the original thing that we're talking about, but yeah, that definitely sort of tracks and makes sense to me. I find that overhead to be daunting as a GM. This is something I agonized about in Pathfinder First Edition, and part of the reason that I was drawn towards Adventure Paths because they adjudicate all the items for you. They just give you the items that matter when as part of the sort of things. But one of the things that feels pretty freeing, to be honest with you, about 5e is I never have to worry about that stuff. I gold, I don't have to worry, are they getting enough gold at the end of this dungeon? Because it just kind of doesn't matter all that much. Whereas it sounds like in Pathfinder, that kind of thing, when you're not using the inherent bonus rule, that kind of thing is really, really, really cool to the way that it is all sort of set up.
I mean, some of there are wealth by level tables, and there are other things there too. But part of the thing that I think is nice is that because of the way the action system works, most of the thing, as long as you kind of if you look at the table, it'll give you the level of the item, which is roughly corresponds with what level character should be using it at core use. It is hard to it's mostly options, right? I have an Earthglide cloak. This gives me a burrow speed once an hour, right? That's not crazy enough for it to be a huge deal, but every once in a while I use it, right? And it's not or I have it's called the Ring of the Ram, and I can spend 1, 2, or 3 actions to unleash an air burst that gets a save and knocks people back, right? But because if I'm using that, I'm not moving, I'm not casting a spell. So eventually, maybe when I first get it, it's a little bit powerful, but as I level up, right, 1, I'm going to fall off of it, and 2, it's going to be situational, and it's not it's giving me more power because it's taking the place of the normal things I would do with my turn.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. All right. Well, I guess I also want to throw it to the chat. Obviously, we have a couple of chatters who hanging out with us. Are there any ancillary Pathfinder 2e questions that we did not ask or talk about or address that you just be interested in getting the Mango's expert opinion on?
I would also recommend that if any of you in the chat want to just look over it, Archives of Nethys. If you just Google PF2E, I think it's the first link. Um, all of the rules are available. Paizo put it all under their orc license. Haha, orc. It's like open something, right? But you can read all the rules for free. It's stripped of some of the kind of like more intellectual property stuff, right? There's a couple of things that don't exist because they're like very tied to like a Galarian specific setting thing, but like all of the core stuff is there. You can just kind of read it. It's not laid out as nicely as the core rulebook, but it's there. Also, for people who know me personally, I can lend you my copy either digitally or physically.
Yeah, that's true. Well, listen, we would never do that digitally. Okay, we would never encourage piracy, but lending, we would be happy to lend a book because I don't think anybody is looking to do that. I don't know. Yeah, we kind of ate through our weeks, but also we did the podcast 3 days ago, so nothing much has changed in my life. Okay, buddy, I painted a bunch of Warhammer minis today. Like that's the biggest update. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like, did I do anything interesting? I started Jujutsu Kaisen with my fiance. I think I was annoying her because I was sitting there and be like, is that the Sasuke? Oh, that's the Kakashi. There's literally a guy with white hair, but he's got a blindfold over both of his eyes. I'm like, that's just Kakashi, right? Like, and he's like the sensei character, right? So like, I think it's Gojiro, I think is the character's name. But yeah. And the main character has a like demon trapped inside of him, right? It's like it's just a Naruto, right? Like it's a little different.
Just Naruto, yeah.
But yeah. Something I've been forgetting to bring up is a couple of weeks ago I watched Arrival on a plane, which was an interesting movie.
Yeah, I'm a famous hater of Arrival. I think it's one of Denis Villeneuve's worst movies, but it's one of everyone's. It's the movie that everybody I got turned on to him by Sicario, but Arrival came out maybe the next year, maybe 2 years later, and everybody really loved Arrival, and I was like, Arrival's mid, but whatever.
What don't you like about Arrival? I'm curious now.
The core thing I think is lame about Arrival is the conceit. It is entirely building towards this moment where the main character tells.
Spoilers for Arrival, I guess.
Yeah, spoilers for Arrival. The main character tells the side character what the like Chinese general said, and the thing is war makes widows of us all or something like that. And I just think that is such a fucking boring answer that I found it so underwhelming. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm talking about? The thing that she tells it to the Chinese general. The thing she tells to the Chinese general in order to convince him to stop a thing with the way they're interacting with the aliens, and I just thought boring, lame, stupid, dumb, just like level. Have I ever talked about level 0 thing? This is like level 0 thinking. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
War is bad. War is bad, man. It's like it's like kill me. I thought that was so fucking stupid.
Yeah. Maybe that didn't bother me so much because it's like it's kind of like very like time travel paradox. It's like he tells her the thing that she needs to say to him to get him to stop it, right? Because of the way this weird language thing was. The thing that like it didn't really bother me, but the thing that's like it's like the superior Whorf hypothesis, which I believe the strong form of is like just like discredited is maybe too large because it's like it was a hypothesis, right? It's not like it's like anybody claimed it was absolutely true, but nobody who knew what they were talking about claimed it was absolutely true. But like the strong form of the superior Whorf hypothesis is no longer believed to be true, or is believed to that hypothesis is believed to be invalid. So that was one of those things where it was like, oh, okay, this is like. It's like the slightly smarter version of like you only use 10% of your brain, man. What if you unlocked all of it, right? Like, which is also not true, right? Like, it's just, it's like a slightly smarter version of that. I did think the twist was kind of neat because like I didn't see it. This is one of the few twists in movies that I didn't see coming. So I thought that
You know,
that
listen, I bet my grandfather would have really loved this movie. Okay, just to shout out Rachel's vision board thing. But you know, yeah, I don't know. That's my general feeling. Arrival. Also, Arrival is a particularly visually boring movie, is what I would call it, because like there's just not a ton. It has style. Like I think Denis Villeneuve is like great, but there's just like not a ton that you can do with the camera to make it compelling in the same way that Sicario, Blade Runner 2049, Dune, these all really are like visually compelling films to me on a level of like, you know, on the Grango scale, okay, like on the level of having like a talented DP who are taking these like memorable, super awesome kind of shots.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was a great movie to watch on a plane, which
Okay.
is
Have you watched Furiosa yet? Can we do our
no,
Furiosa
I have
episode
not
ever?
watched Furiosa yet. That was
I'm
not
gonna watch it
available.
again. I'm gonna watch it right now. One of the things that I've been doing. So behind me, you don't see. Right here is my TV, and right past it is my table of minis pushed up against the wall. And the thing that I do is I sit on the couch basically and just put something on, and that's where I'm painting and I'm gluing and all of the rest of it. And so I'm very excited for this part of my life and the hyperfixation to keep going.
That's what I've been doing with like podcasts or books. Like I have been listening to the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Really?
Yeah.
Ooh, interesting.
I
Okay.
listened to it once and it kind of just like went in one ear and went out. It was one of those things that like I was kind of like not really listening to it. And part of the reason I'm listening to it is um, there is a D&D character that I am playing that is like supposed to be like a warrior philosopher. I'm like, oh, Marcus Aurelius, Stoicism. This is like perfect for this character, right?
Oh,
And,
I should do this for Kenzo actually, because he's also supposed to be a warrior poet.
um, well, I mean, you could do Sun Tzu for Kenzo, right? Like,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I should do. I should do the Book of Five Rings, which I did. Kid, and not a little kid. I mean, I was like a fucking teenager. I was a weeb. I was a weeb teenager. I thought I was so cool, right? Like the Book of Five Rings is Bushido, the book about sort of like Bushido stuff, which would dovetail so nicely with who sort of Kenzo
yeah,
is. Kenzo has the funny thing about Kenzo in that D&D game is he very quickly adopted this Captain America sort of persona, right? Like someone lied to he did the thing where like someone lied to an authority figure and Kenzo was like, I really don't think that we should be lying to these people because I'm lawful good conversation, which I thought was I love that. I'm a big fan. But anyway, so yeah, Marcus Aurelius. Okay.
yeah. Um, he's such a straight edge for Kenzo. Yeah,
Now, Kenzo is going to be is like he is a perfect RA, kind of character. Like, yeah. Anyway.
I feel that my level 20 war priest cleric is a lawful neutral cleric of Abadar, and his whole thing is like you're just like being like you can come quietly, you're under arrest for breaking the law, right? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We got another one of these. People I need to ban. There. Yeah. Well, anything else you want to talk about before we
No, listen, yeah.
All right. And like I said, I'll put a link to Archives of Nethys in the description. There's a lot of stuff there, which I think the strength of the system. It's just like if you can think of it as a concept, you can either build it or it's like natively supported, right? Like, Magus is a really fun class. Friend of the cast, Nick, is playing a Magus in the Mark game, and it's like it's if you wanted to be like a spell sword weeb, right? Like that's Magus, right? Like you get limited spell casting, and you're pretty good at hitting things, and then like you can hit things with your spells. It's great. So like, but like stuff like that, right? You want to be a wrestler? There's a wrestler archetype, right? In my other game, I'm playing this warrior philosopher character. He's a lizard man. He's a fighter, and he's got the wrestler archetype, and he just grabs things, right?
Fuck yeah.
And and like punches them a bunch. It's great. That kind of thing. But yeah. Wow, All right, I'm going to go into the exit spiel then. If you'd like to email us about any of the things we talked about in this podcast, you can email us at derpsgames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsgames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/derpsgames or youtube.com/derpsgames where they go out live. Rate reviews wherever you can find podcasts. Links are all down in the description. Buddy, do you have anything you're looking to promote?
You know, Rain World is going to be coming out on Friday, so keep a lookout for that. But you know, that's it.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.